Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to a series of videos in which I am reading you a book. We are reading Barchester Towers together by Anthony Trollope. The story of a power struggle in the Cathedral Close, city of Barchester, in which the new bishop's chaplain, Mr. Slope, has called in for an interview with the saintly old warden of Hiram's Hospital, Mr. Harding, and told him that the disused and disreputable old practices of the past are being carted out on the rubbish cart. A very woundful thing to say, clearly meant to wound, and Mr. Harding takes it to heart. He thinks he is being talked of. He thinks he's the thing that is wasteful old rubbish, because he has, in the past, drawn a large salary for nominal work at the hospital. And Mr. Slope would like to end that, and also control everything that comes in its wake. This desire to control Barchester has already set up factions, sides. The new bishop, Mr. Prouty, and his wife, of course, with their chaplain, are one side, and also a distressing number of the ladies of Barchester who seem ensorcelled by Mr. Slope. But also on the other side are the Grantleyites, named after the old bishop's son, Dr. Grantley, who is the Archdeacon of Barchester, and who does not want any of the liturgical changes that Mr. Slope is hinting at, but he mainly doesn't want to lose control over the diocese himself, which he has exercised ruthlessly for years. And caught in the middle of all this is poor Mr. Harding, who doesn't want to come to battles with anybody. He doesn't like Mr. Slope, but he doesn't want to fight with anybody. He especially doesn't want the kind of national attention and humiliation that came his way when the late John Bold, who goes on to marry his daughter, made a federal case out of the running of the old hospital and got the newspapers involved and eventually Parliament involved. He especially doesn't want notoriety on either side for any reason. And that desire for a quiet life has been upended by the fact that he has recently had the idea proposed to him that maybe Mr. Slope wants more than just his acquiescence. Maybe Mr. Slope wants his widowed daughter as £1,000 a year under her own control and a little baby she worships. Anyway, Mr. Harding went to this interview and heard about the rubbish cart and went home and learned from his daughter that Mr. Slope had made inroads in the household by talking about, all the changes that he wants to make at the hospital. And then he goes out to Plumstead Episcopi to talk with Dr. Grantley, who's not there when he gets there. In the last chapter, Dr. Grantley is out, and he'll be out until supper time. So instead, Mr. Harding talks with his daughter, who is Grantley's wife. And now we're on to chapter 14. And the title is The New Champion. And the new champion mentions, it seems to allude to something that I've mentioned has been largely missing here, which is outside action. Some plot that involves something other than an ecclesiastical power play has to be on Trollope's mind by now, because he knows that he serialized this originally in magazines, so he has to know that half his readers aren't interested in that. It looks like we've had new blood. Of course, the first new blood we got was the new bishop and his wife and the chaplain, and that set up a war in the Barchester Close. We also got new characters in the form of the family of Dr. Vesey Stanhope, who came back to the church with all of his weird children, and we might be getting somebody else in this chapter. Fascinating character. That choking sound you hear is my little dog, who is going nuts, arm's length away on the bed, because I am not next to her. This will be a reading and some choking sounds. This is chapter 14. The Archdeacon did not return to the parsonage till close upon the hour of dinner, and there was therefore no time to discuss matters before that important ceremony. He seemed to be in an especially good humor, and welcomed his father-in-law with a sort of jovial earnestness that was usual with him when things on which he was intent were going as he would have them. "It's all settled, my dear," said he to his wife as he washed his hands in the dressing-room, while she, according to her wont, sat listening in the bedroom. "Arabin has agreed to accept the living. He'll be here next week." And the Archdeacon scrubbed his hands and rubbed his face with a violent alacrity, which showed that Arabin's coming was a great point gained. "Will he come here to Plumstead?" said the wife. "He has promised to stay a month with us," said the Archdeacon, "so that he may see what his parish is like. You'll like Arabin very much. He's a gentleman in every respect, and full of humour." "He's very queer, isn't he?" asked the lady. Well, he's a little odd in some of his fancies, but there's nothing in him that you won't like. He is as staunch a churchman as there is at Oxford. I really don't know what we should do without Arabin. It's a great thing for me to have him so near me, and if anything can put Slope down, Arabin will do it. So we are going to get a new character. The Reverend Francis Arabin was a fellow of Lazarus, a favored disciple of the great Dr. Gwynne, a high churchman at all points, so high indeed that at one point of his career he had all but toppled over into the cesspool of Rome. Yay! A poet and also a polemical writer, a great pet in the common rooms at Oxford, an eloquent clergyman, a droll, odd, humorous, energetic, conscientious man, and as the deacon had boasted of him, a thorough gentleman. As he will hereafter be brought more closely to our notice, it is now only necessary to add that he had just been presented to the vicarage of St. Ewald by Dr. Grantley, in whose gift as archdeacon the living lay. So Grantley gets to give him a job. Frida. Oh, never mind. St. Ewald is a parish lying just within the city of Barchester. The suburbs of the new town, indeed, are partly within its precincts, and pretty church and parsonage are not much above a mile distant from the city gate. St. Ewald is not a rich piece of preferment. It's worth some 300 or 400 a year at most, and has generally been held by a clergyman attached to the cathedral choir. The archdeacon, however, felt that when the living on this occasion had become vacant, that it imperatively belonged to him to aid to the force of his party with some tower of strength, if any such tower of strength could be got to occupy St. Ewald's. He had discussed the matter with his brethren in Barchester, not in any weak spirit as the holder of patronage to be used for his own or his family's benefit, but as one to whom was committed the trust on the due administration of which the church's welfare may depend. He had submitted to them the name of Mr. Arabin, and as though the choice had rested with them all in a conclave, and they had unanimously admitted that if Mr. Arabin would accept St. Ewald's, no better choice could possibly be made. If Mr. Arabin would accept St. Ewald's, well, there lay the difficulty. Mr. Arabin was a man standing somewhat prominently before the world, that is, before the Church of England world. He was not a rich man, it is true, for he held no preferment but his fellowship, but he was a man not over-anxious for riches, not married, of course, and one whose time was greatly taken up in discussing, both in print and on platforms, the privileges and practices of the Church to which he belonged. As the archdeacon had done battle for its temporalities, so did Mr. Arabin do battle for its spiritualities. Both had done them conscientiously, that is, not so much each for his own benefit as for that of others. So we're already liking Mr. Arabin in a way that by this point we were not liking the bishop. Holding such a position as Mr. Arabin did, there was much reason to doubt whether he would consent to become the parson of St. Ewald's, and Dr. Grantley had taken the trouble to go himself to Oxford on the matter. Dr. Gwynne and Dr. Grantley together had succeeded in persuading this eminent divine that duty required him to go to Barchester. There were wheels within wheels in this affair. For some time past, Mr. Arabin had been engaged in a tremendous controversy with no less a person than Mr. Slope respecting the apostolic succession. So, no small reason why he was chosen. He's already an outspoken enemy of Mr. Slope. These two gentlemen had never seen each other, but they had been extremely bitter in print. Mr. Slope had endeavored to strengthen his cause by calling Mr. Arabin an owl. And Mr. Arabin had retaliated by hinting that Mr. Slope was an infidel. This battle had been commenced in the columns of the Daily Jupiter, a powerful newspaper, the manager of which was very friendly to Mr. Slope's view of the case. The matter, however, had become too tedious for the readers of the Jupiter, and a little note had therefore been appended to one of Mr. Slope's, telling rejoinders, in which it had been stated that no further letters from the reverend gentleman could be inserted except as advertisements. Which does happen with newspaper set-tos back and forth. Sometimes they go down into the weeds and have to be just stopped. The newspaper will say, we're closing this discussion. Other methods of publication were, however, found less expensive than advertisements in the Jupiter, and the war went on merrily. Mr. Slope declared that the main part of the consecration of a clergyman was the self-devotion of the inner man to the duties of the ministry. Mr. Arabin contended that a man was not consecrated at all, and had indeed no single attribute of a clergyman unless he became so thorough an imposition of the bishop's hand, who had become a bishop through the imposition of other hands, through the imposition of the hands of one or more such bishops, and so on in direct line to one of the apostles. Each had repeatedly hung the other on the horns of a dilemma, but neither seemed to be a whit the worse for the hanging, and so the war went on merrily. Whether or no the near neighborhood of the foe may have acted in any way as an inducement to Mr. Arabin to accept the living of St. Ewans, we will not pretend to say, but it had at any rate been settled in Dr. Gwynne's library at Lazarus that he would accept it, and that he would lend his assistance toward driving the enemy out of Barchester, or at any rate, silencing while he remained there. I think it's pretty sure that this was a factor in his decision. Mr. Arabin intended to keep his rooms at Oxford, and to have the assistance of a curate at St. Ewald, but he promised to give as much time as possible to the neighborhood of Barchester, and from so great a man, Dr. Grantley was quite satisfied with such a promise. It was no small part of the satisfaction derivable from such an arrangement that Bishop Proudie would be forced to institute into a living, immediately under his own nose, the enemy of his favorite chaplain. So he's going to take the £400 a year. He's not promising that he'll ever show up for the work. But anyway, all through dinner, the Archdeacon's good humor shone brightly in his face. He ate of the good things heartily. He drank wine with his wife and daughter. He talked pleasantly of his doings at Oxford, told his father-in-law that he ought to visit Dr. Gwynne at Lazarus, and launched out again in praise of Mr. Arabin. "Is Mr. Arabin married, Papa?" asked Griselda. "No, dear. The fellow of a college is never married." "Is he a young man, Papa?" "About 40, I believe," said the Archdeacon. "Oh," said Griselda. Had her father said 80, Mr. Arabin could not have appeared to her to be very much older. You'll get there, Griselda. When the two gentlemen were left alone over their wine, Mr. Harding told his tale of woe. But even this, sad as it was, did not much diminish the Archdeacon's good humor, though it greatly added to his pugnacity. I bet the wine helped there as well. But Dr. Grantley is a very pugnacious person. "He can't do it," said Dr. Grantley over and over again, as his father-in-law explained to him the terms on which the new warden of the hospital was to be appointed. "He can't do it. What he says is not worth the trouble of listening to. He can't alter the duties of the place." Remember, we've been told that Mr. Slope doesn't just want to reinstitute a warden for Hiram's Hospital, he also wants to make Hiram's Hospital into a preaching house with collections where the folk collect for worship every day, where there's a sermon preached at least once a week, where all that sort of stuff is new, and also there to be a Sabbath day school that Mr. Harding will administer. It's largely a new job that Mr. Slope has proposed. "Who can't?" asked the ex-warden. "Neither the bishop nor the chaplain, nor yet the bishop's wife, who, I take it, has really more to say on such matters than either of the other two. The whole body corporate of the palace together have no power to turn the warden of the hospital into a schoolmaster. But the bishop has the power to appoint whom he pleases, and I don't know that. I rather think he'll find he has no such power. Let him try it and see what the press will say. For once, we shall have the popular cry on our side. But Proudie, ass as he is, knows the world too well to get such a hornet's nest about his ears." Mr. Harding winced at the idea of the press. Yes, we winced right along with him. We saw him suffer in the warden. He doesn't want the press involved, especially not when he's involved. Not again. Can't he just be at peace? He had had enough of that sort of publicity, and was unwilling to be shown up a second time either as a monster or as a martyr. He gently remarked that he hoped the newspapers would not get a hold of his name again, and then suggested that perhaps it would be better that he should abandon his object. "I am getting old," he said, "and after all, I doubt whether I am fit to undertake new duties." "New duties?" said the Archdeacon. "Don't I tell you there shall be no new duties?" "Or perhaps old duties either," said Mr. Harding. "I think I will remain content as I am." The picture of Mr. Slope carting away the rubbish was still present in his mind. That got to him. Not only Slope just casually referring to the way that things have been done at Barchester for 100 years as rubbish to be carted away, but also the doubts that Mr. Harding as a character is always going to have that maybe it's true. All of that is just preying on it. The Archdeacon drank off his glass of claret and prepared himself to be energetic. "I do hope," said he, "that you are not going to be so weak as to allow such a man as Mr. Slope to deter you from doing what you know it is your duty to do. You know it is your duty to resume your place at the hospital, now that Parliament has so settled the stipend as to remove those difficulties which induced you to resign it. You cannot deny this, and should your timidity now prevent you from doing so, your conscience will hereafter never forgive you." Meaning Dr. Grantley will never forgive him, and never let him hear the end of it. And as he finished this clause of his speech, he pushed over the bottle to his companion. "Your conscience will never forgive you," he continued. "You resigned the place from conscientious scruples, scruples which I had greatly respected, though I did not share them. All your friends respected them, and you left your old house as rich in reputation as you were ruined in fortune. But it is now expected that you will return. Dr. Gwynne was saying just the other day. Dr. Gwynne does not reflect on how much older a man I am now than when he last saw me. Old nonsense, said the Archdeacon. You never thought yourself old till you listened to that impudent trash of a coxcomb at the palace. I shall be 65 if I live till November, said Mr. Harding. And 75 if you live till November 10 years, said the Archdeacon. But you bid fair to be as efficient then as you were 10 years ago. But for heaven's sake, let us have no pretense in this matter. Your plea of old age is only a pretense. But you're not drinking your wine. It is only a pretense. The fact is, you are half afraid of this slope and would rather subject yourself to comparative poverty and discomfort than come to blows with a man who will trample you if you let him. Here I sympathize with Dr. Grantley, because on many an evening here at Hyde Cottage, I interrupt the flow of my invective to say, you're not drinking your wine, and then I resume the flow of my invective. I certainly don't like coming to blows if I can help it. Nor I either. What hogwash. Grantley loves fighting. Nor I neither, but sometimes we can't help it. This man's object is to induce you to refuse the hospital, that he may put some creature of his own into it, that he may show his power, and insult us all by insulting you, whose cause and character are so intimately bound up with that of the chapter. You owe it to all of us to resist him in this, even if you have no solicitude for yourself. But surely, for your own sake, you will not be so lily-livered as to fall into this trap which he has baited for you, let him take the very bread out of your mouth without a struggle. Mr. Harding did not like being called lily-livered, and was rather inclined to resent it. I doubt if there is any true courage, he said, in squabbling for money. If honest men did not squabble for money in this wicked world of ours, the dishonest men would get it all. Not sure that Dr. Grantley is the perfect representation of Christianity here, but let's just move on. And I do not see that the cause of virtue would be much improved. No, we must use the means which we have. If we were to carry our argument home, we might give away every shilling of revenue which the church has, and I presume you are not prepared to say that the church would be strengthened by such a sacrifice. No, but the poor would benefit. The poor would benefit. The poor of, for instance, Italy would benefit immensely if the Vatican sold one of its Titians and distributed the income. Just one. Say nothing of its 500 pounds of 4th century gold, 5th century gold, 6th century gold, 11th century gold. Anyway, I don't want to get drawn into the columns of the Jupiter, now do I? The Archdeacon filled his glass and then emptied it, drinking with much reverence a silent toast to the well-being and permanent security of those temporalities which were so dear to his soul. I think all quarrels between clergyman and his bishop should be avoided, said Mr. Harding. I think so too. No, you don't. But it is quite as much of the duty of a bishop to look to that as his inferior. I tell you what, my friend, I'll see the bishop in this matter. That is, if you will allow me, and you may be sure I will not compromise you. My opinion is that all this trash about the Sunday schools and the sermons has originated wholly with Slope and Mrs. Proudie, and that the bishop knows nothing about it. The bishop can't very well refuse to see me, and I'll come upon him when he has neither his wife nor his chaplain by him. I think you'll find that it will end in his sending you the appointment without any condition whatsoever. And as the seats in the cathedral, because one of the proposals, the horrible proposals, snobbish, vicious, uncharitable, unchristian proposals that Mr. Slope is insisting on, is that since the old beadsman at Hiram's Hospital will be read a sermon once a week, there's really no reason for them to muddy up the church. They don't really have to come to the cathedral for Sunday service. We don't really want their kind there. Horrifying. And as to the seats in the cathedral, we may safely leave that to Mr. Dean. I believe the fool positively thinks that the bishop could walk away with the cathedral if he pleased. Very interesting note that's being sounded throughout here. We haven't really had it contradicted yet. Of Dr. Grantley really not wanting to believe the worst of the new bishop. Right from the beginning, he has been kind of sort of defending the bishop and saying all this evil is coming from his wife and his chaplain, not the man himself. It's kind of interesting. I wonder why that is. Is it just that Grantley is such an institutionalist that he can't believe ill completely of the bishop? Anyway, let's continue here. And so the matter was arranged between them. Mr. Harding had come expressly for advice, and therefore felt himself bound to take the advice given him. He had known, moreover, beforehand, that the Archdeacon could not hear of his giving up the matter, and accordingly, though he was in perfect good faith put forward his own views, he was prepared to yield. They therefore went into the drawing room in good humour with each other, and the evening passed pleasantly in prophetic discussions of the future wars of Arabin and Slope. The frogs and the mice would be nothing to them, nor the angers of Agamemnon and Achilles. How the Archdeacon rubbed his hands and plumed himself on the success of his last move. He could not himself descend into the arena with Mr. Slope, but Arabin would have no such scruples. Arabin was exactly the man for such work, and the only man whom he knew was fit for it. Because remember, Dr. Grantley has already told us, he's told his fellows in the close, I can't fight with this creature Slope on my own. I can't fight with the bishop's wife at all. She officially doesn't exist. And I can't fight with a jumped up, horrible, greasy creature like Mr. Slope. Instead of broaching those scruples on his own, he has found someone to do the fighting down in the gutter. The Archdeacon's good humor and high buoyancy continued till, when reclining on his pillow, Mrs. Grantley commenced to give him her view of the state of affairs at Barchester. And then certainly he was startled. The last words he said that night were as follows: "If she does, by heaven, I'll never speak to her again." So we know the wife has brought up the possibility that Eleanor Bold might entertain the suit of Mr. Slope. "If she does, by heaven, I'll never speak to her again. She dragged me into the mire once, and I'll not pollute myself with such filth as that." And the Archdeacon gave a shudder which shook the whole room, so violently was he convulsed with the thought that so agitated his mind. Now, in this matter, the widow Bold was scandalously ill-treated by her relatives. The narrator keeps saying that. You can believe it if you want. I think that Eleanor has gone a lot further in considering this than the narrator is willing to believe. She had spoken to the man 3 or 4 times and had expressed her willingness to teach in a Sunday school. Such was the full extent of her sins in the matter of Mr. Slope. Poor Eleanor, but time will show. The next morning, Mr. Harding returned to Barchester, no further word having been spoken in his hearing respecting Mr. Slope's acquaintance with his younger daughter. But he observed that the Archdeacon at breakfast was less cordial than he had been on the preceding evening. And that is the end of chapter 14 and chapter 15's title. Keep in mind, the title of the next chapter would sometimes be advertised at the end of the present chapter in the serialization. But either way, even if you're just reading it as a novel, the title of the next chapter is The Widow's Suitors. So we're not done with this subject at all. And that puts the discordant note at the end. Dr. Grantley, otherwise in this chapter, has completely had his way, as he tends to do. He has not only found a champion to fight Mr. Slope on his own level, and someone who has a long history of fighting Mr. Slope, but he's also just taken over the will of Mr. Harding, who went there saying, what he's been telling us, I'm going to resign. I'm not going to accept this new position. It's too much for me. I don't want to do any new duties. I don't want to be beholden to Mr. Slope. That goes out the window in the face of Archdeacon Grantley's charisma and force of personality, his pugnacity, because he is saying not only that those changes aren't going to happen, but that the bishop doesn't have the authority to institute them. He also doesn't have, according to Grantley, he doesn't have the authority to appoint anybody else to the position, much less change the position. We'll have it all hashed out for us, but that is the next chapter of Barchester Towers. Good fun. So we will move on next time, and I am going to wrap this up and calm down my affronted little dog. But I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.